Opinion: Endgame cements Iron Man's legacy in the MCU. IGN. Spoiler alert. There are tons of The first 22 films in the MCU ultimately center around two men, Iron Man and Thanos. When we first meet, Tony Stark's journey established the larger tone and direction of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Not only was the three Iron Man movies built a clear, cohesive character arc for Tony to follow. In the first movie, that's where things started to get a little weird and confusing. Following Iron Man, in some ways it can be tough to reconcile those two movies and the transition Tony underwent in Age of Ultron. It doesn't help. In short, it does feel as though Marvel Studios hadn't entirely figured out what it wanted to do with Tony post Iron Man 3. Maybe the problem is, but whatever is to blame for the sometimes contradictory path Tony's arc took, Civil War helped re-center the character and set the stage for Marvel's Endgame. There we saw Tony. In hindsight, Infinity War and Endgame were always going to be the end of the road for Tony. He had done despite this crushing defeat, Tony was the only character who found a happy ending in the aftermath of Infinity War. He had his blissful, as the conclusion to Endgame reminds us, Tony ultimately needn't have worried about his legacy. His funeral was it's hard to imagine a better legacy than that to leave behind, and a better way to usher in the next era of the MCU. He was Iron Man. For more on Avengers, read Ara, learn about Thea, or let Yuza for you. Check out all Thea. Jesse is a mild-mannered writer for IGN. Allow him to lend him. We encourage you to read our updated end.
Raindrops, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that.